One of the books coming out by All Points, Jeanne Safer.
So one of my favorite projects, Jeanne Safer is an old friend of mine. She's married to Richard Brookhiser, who is also an old friend of mine, a National Review journalist, an author of many books, some of which I published in the past. They are a politically mixed couple. Jeanne is a liberal, Rick is a conservative. They get along just fine. They've been married 37 years, I think. And Jeanne came to me about 8 or 9 months ago and said, you know, she's a psychotherapist, and she said, I get so many calls now from clients saying, I need help. You know, my husband won't stop watching Fox, or my wife won't let me watch Fox. And so she's seeing more and more couples, and she wanted to write a book about a relationship guide for politically mixed couples, not just married couples, but friends, relatives, colleagues. And so we signed her up, and the book is called I Love You, But I Hate Your Politics.
This book has a long prehistory based on my marriage with Rick. At our wedding, William F. Buckley was present. His enforcer, the McCarthy's right-hand man, gave a reading, and the person who walked me down the aisle was one of the first people removed from his job as a professor by McCarthyite forces in New York. And a friend of ours said at the time, you know, politics makes strange bedfellows. Anyway, so that's been our history, and I've lived as kind of the mascot of the right and National Review for many, many years. And it's been a very eye-opening...
You're very liberal.
Yes, yes, I'm a liberal Democrat. And in fact, I think there is... Rick and I, have we ever voted the same? We both voted for Giuliani the first time. And we both believe in the death penalty for over cell phone use. But other than that, we have literally no position in common. None. Abortion, assisted suicide, gun control, all the big hits, we are on the opposite side.
And how many years have you been married?
37.
How many years?
37 in September.
How many years happily?
I think I'll honestly say 37, but you know, the first year or so, there were issues about how we were going to deal with this. Now, little did I know that, you know, at that point, 20% of people married across party lines. Now it's 9%. So we were already in a time when, you know, my father was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat, kind of thing. But that's not the case anymore. So I kind of was adopted by National Review, you know, and it was a very eye-opening experience in many, many ways. Because I learned that people who disagreed with me could be good friends, could be thoughtful, could be people I wanted to spend time with, even more sometimes than people that I agreed with perfectly. For instance, the last boyfriend that I had before that, we were in perfect harmony politically. So this was really a learning experience for me. Rick had lived in a liberal world before, so he was, but I think we did have to learn, at least I had to learn, what not to talk about. Because he had his outlet at National Review. He wrote editorials. I never read them. That's how we did it. Now he writes columns about life in the city and the country and writes history. Oh, that's wonderful for me. It's great because now I read everything that he writes. and Trump's election may have been terrible for many, many marriages. The divorce rate among millennials has gone up to 55% of people who were on different sides of Trump. But for our marriage, it has been heaven because he's not a Trump supporter. So we can actually talk about politics. It's a rare, wonderful thing.
The subtitle of your book is How to Protect Your Intimate Relationships in a Poisonous, Partisan World. Is President Trump, in your view, responsible for the drop in inter-political marriages?
I think there's no question. I wish it weren't true, but it is true. And this has been happening, of course, since the Iraq War and all kinds of things where the polarization in the country has gotten worse and worse. But at this point, I never had people email me that never met me and said, what can I do? I'm about to get divorced over politics. I've never had that happen. I got 3 emails like that.
What's the solution? Is there one? Should we be self-segregating?
I think that's insane. And I think, because I'm a psychologist, the real solution is not about politics, it's about psychology. What's the psychology that's under these fights? Because the first thing you have to realize is you can never win a political fight with a political opponent. It's not possible. You can have a debate, you can yell and scream, but you can't win. And the reason that you can't win is that you can never change another person's mind about anything, really. Now, I was thinking, well, what about missionaries? All right, you can get religion, but not because you said they should change their mind. You know, to me, the notion of abortion is a given. I mean, it's a woman's basic right. To Rick, it's something entirely different. There is no way I'm going to change his mind. And I've learned, this is what I've learned in 38 years. When Ireland repealed the laws in which women were actually dying because they couldn't get abortions, I didn't say a word to Rick. Aren't you impressed? He mentioned it. I didn't say a word. That's what I've learned. I talk to other people, and he talks to other people, but this does not belong in our relationship. It just doesn't. And because we have more important things to talk about, and one of the most important things, I think, is what real core values are. And this is a minority opinion in a sense, but I talked to a lot of people who, it turns out, found out the hard way. A young woman I know, her father died, and they were very, very liberal. They live in upstate New York, which is the hotbed of more than New York City. And he had 5 siblings, I think it was. 4 of them were extremely liberal. The 5th was an ex-Marine, I think, who was an evangelical. Guess who showed up to help her? Only one. And that was very important to her. And so my criteria for what matters as a core value is when you're lying in a hospital bed getting chemotherapy, which Rick and I both had to do, you do not ask the party registration of the person who's standing next to you getting you through it. If you do, you're crazy.
So are you saying, Dr. Safer, that politics is not necessarily a binding marital force?
I think it can be. But I think there are many other things that are much more important. It certainly can be a divisive marital force. My favorite story of this is a couple that I did 50 interviews for this book of brothers and sisters and parents and children. Oh, you don't want to know about the father who unfriended his son. Let me tell you, I have stories that could really, yes, that's the look you should be having. But one of them that was remarkable, and here National Review was wonderful. They gave me a lot. I asked on NRO, and any of you embroiled in generous, very frank. But one couple, they were both professionals, very well off, very smart. They came actually from out of town to have this talk with me.
For the book?
Yes. And they had started out both liberal, and he got more conservative and voted for Trump, and she was utterly devastated. They had much in common in other ways. They both had professional degrees. She was devastated. She said, how can you love me? How can you be in my world if you believe this and I don't believe it? And they were really at loggerheads. And then when I was talking about how they fought, she said, well, one thing is very clear. She said, they were well off, and they had a 3-story house in a fancy part of a fancy city. She said, I don't let him watch Fox, even in the basement. 3 floors down. He was not allowed to watch any media that didn't agree with her. And he went along with it. And I said, what do you think it's going to do, pollute the airwaves? I mean, it's on the 3rd floor. You're 3 floors. You can get some air freshener. You can do something. Anyway, I thought that was... And another thing that she did, this is something that I found across the board is a terrible thing to do. If you want people to have some advice, this is the first piece of advice. No article thrusting at your partner who has the opposite idea. Your parent, your child, your husband, your wife, your friend, anybody. Don't do it. It's a disaster. Here, read this. Here, look at what's on your breakfast table, a thing by my side. It is so alienating, and it is almost universal.
So, Dr. Safer, you said that you never read your husband Richard Brookhiser's op-eds or his editorials when he wrote for National Review.
I know what they said.
Okay, I was going to say, is that fair to you, though, that you have to restrict what...
It doesn't feel restrictive. It feels it feels smart. I know what Rick thinks. I was at the Bork dinner, you know, when I was at Reagan's this and that. I was at all of it. I know what these people think, and a lot of it I can't stand, but a lot of them I can stand. And I found a good, this is kind of a metaphor for how I worked it out for myself. Now, it's also, because Rick is an unusual man, you know, and I don't know if he was very combative with me or a pain in the ass, whether I could do it, I don't know. But this was I think this was at the dinner after Bork was turned down for the Supreme Court. And of course, everyone stood and gave him a standing ovation. Now here's my problem. What do? Do I stand up and give him a standing ovation? That I couldn't do. Should I sit down and make a statement? I didn't want to do that. So I stood up and didn't clap. And that, I think, is a metaphor for how you work this out. Plus, you have to understand what's underneath. Because no political fight, that goes on and on, like all of these do, that I read about and wrote about, none of them are just about politics. They're about unfinished business in the relationship. They're unfinished business from your childhood. They're, you know, between siblings. So you should see what comes out. You know, you think mom loved you best was a thing. What if you agree with mom and your sister doesn't? Then you get finally to be closer to her, and she doesn't. It's really remarkable. But one thing I think that's very positive for people to know, that if they think about it, if they really think about it, and understand what's going on beneath, they can really change how they talk about politics, or how they don't talk about politics, or how it affects their relationship. What I did is, with a number of the interviews where I thought that there was hope of something, and that was most of them actually, I counseled the people about, look, you know, I know you hate your sister's a liberal and you're on the right, but what do you like about her? And he told me, he said, she had a wonderful sense of beauty and truth and art. And I said, why don't you call her? Don't email her. Don't Facebook her. Call her and say, you know, this really matters to me, and we had a wonderful relationship in childhood. And forget about if Trump's in the White House or not. And I wrote him several months after the interview, and I said, how did it go? And he said, I did it, and we're talking again. You have to always make the first step. That's working through any relationship. So, you know, 40 years plus of being a psychoanalyst has really come in handy about being a political psychoanalyst.